Okay, we're up to the beginning of Tav Tzadi Hey Amid Aleph, the top of the Amid. The truth is just to finish. I should have finished this up yesterday. We had a machlokes. What was the shape of the lechem haponim? Was it like a U, like an open box, or was it more of a V? So it says the Gemara Meisver have a kasha. The Brisa says kamin kaveres hayila betanur. There was some sort of basket in the oven that was the mold. And it's describing the mold, and it says v'doimek min tavel mirubas. It was like a square tablet. So that brisa clearly states that the mold was square, not a V. So it says the Gemara. So if you hold like Rav Yechanan that it was shaped like a canoe, like a V, then it says the mold was square. So the Gemara says no. Ema kimpia doimek min tavel mirubas. The answer is the top of the bread was a square, then it came down as a V. So when it says that it was a square, it means the top of the mold. So in other words, it wasn't just a straight V like this. It started like, think of it as a U, and then under the U it went into a V. So it started like that, two lines on the side, flat, and then came down. So it wasn't a straight hard angle V. It's sort of like, again, it's like like an upside down house. Perfect. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kamanda Amar Kvin Svinak Rekedes. Just to end this topic, we will end with a brisa that says Mefurish, it was a V. The brisa says, the Tanya, Arba Snifim Shel Zav Hayusham, there were 4 pieces of gold. It's hard to know exactly what this looked like. Mefutsalis Bereshayim Kimin Dekronim Hayu, with projections at their top like branched reeds. It's describing the side poles, basically, and it's saying there were some sort of things that were coming out of it. Shehu doimek min svin rekedes, and the mold that came out of it was like a fast ship. So it's hard. The Mefarshim are a little bit bothered by what is it describing before that, but it clearly states that the mold was shaped like a boat. So there you go. No, they weren't. No, a boat that's flat doesn't go. No, it's a boat is like that. Okay, very good. If you have a boat that's flat, it won't move very quickly.
Unless it's the table.
So Iboilu, okay, new topic. The Shiloh we're going to have until the Mishnah on Amid Beis is when. So Iboilu, I have a kasha. So the what? I don't know. This is I guess so. I don't know. So Iboilu, I have a kasha. The Shiloh is like this. Oftentimes throughout Shas, I'm not trying to be rude. Oftentimes throughout Shas, the Gemara doesn't say exactly what it says. It just has a brisa. Is it halachah mashma Sinai or not? I'm not sure. It's not based on a pasuk. I guess so. So the kasha is like this, but it doesn't say Gemiri either. So I'm not sure. So the kasha is like this. What we're going to be dealing with until the Mishnah is the lechem haponim was on the shulchan. Okay, when the Mishkan had to move, they would dismantle everything. Now, when you dismantle the Mishkan was called Machane Shechina. Right? There were 3 Machanes: Machane Shechina, the Mishkan; Machane Levia, where the Levium were; Machane Yisrael, the Yisraelim. When you dismantle the Mishkan, obviously Machane Shechina doesn't really exist anymore. They're now moving it in parts. So the question is, when the bread was on the shulchan as they're moving it, does it become disqualified? So you'll say, well, why would it be disqualified? Very simple. If the bread is taken outside of the heichal, it's disqualified. Technically, there is no heichal when it's moving. So that's the shayla. On the other hand, it is on the shulchan where it's supposed to be. But the shulchan is no longer in Machane Shechina. That's the shayla of the discussion. That's the shayla of the Gemara. Iboilu avekasha lechem haponim nifsal b'masais eina nifsal b'masais. When they traveled, did the bread become disqualified? That's the shayla. They had to leave it on as they were traveling, but the question is, did that become disqualified? Yeah, with the bread on it. Well, they had a mold to keep it in place, but yeah. So the shayla is, did it become disqualified? So it's a machlokes. Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, chadam nifsal, chadam ina nifsal. It's a machlokes. Now, mandam nifsal. What's the reason for the one who says that it's possible? Because he says, well, because again, you could look at it both ways. You could look at it as it's out of the azara, out of the heichal, because there is no heichal. On the other hand, you could look at it as it's on the shulchan. So it says the Gemara, it's based on psukim. Manda Amar Nifsal, the one who says Nifsal Dichsiv, because it says Kasha Yachanu Kein Yisau. The same way they encamped, they traveled. What's the point of saying that the same way they encamped, they traveled? The answer is it's telling you halacha. Ma bachani asai nifsal biyotzei. Just like when they were in the encampment, if the bread were to leave the heichal, it's disqualified. Af b'nisiyasei nifsal biyotzei. So to when they traveled, if the bread were to leave the heichal, it's disqualified. I.e., every time they traveled, it's disqualified. That's how he looks at the pasuk. Now, by the way, you could look at the opposite. You could actually dash the pasuk to the opposite, which is the same way when they were encampment. If it's in the proper spot, it's fine. So too when they're traveling, if it's on the shulchan, it's also fine. Which is how the other opinion darshans the pasuk. Anyway, Mandamar Inanisal, and the one who says that it's taka kosher when it's traveling, as long as it's on the shulchan. Why? Because there's the chsiv v'lechem hatamid olav yiyah. The pasuk says the bread shall always be on the shulchan, which implies that as long as it's on the shulchan, you're good to go. So this is the machlokes based on these psukim. Now the Gemara speaks it out. The idach nami, the one who holds that it's kosher, haksiv kashayachanu keniso. What does he do with that pasuk? Which that pasuk we said means that when you travel, it's disqualified. So he says no. Leidach gisa. He's saying no. That the pasuk is actually backing me up. What does the pasuk mean? The pasuk is saying that traveling was like the encampment, but he's saying not to passel it, to actually machshir it. Just like when they're in the encampment, as long as it's on the shulchan, you're fine. So to when it's traveling, as long as it's in the machane, meaning as long as it's on the shulchan, you're fine. Now the idach nami, the one who says that it disqualified, what does he do with that pasuk? That pasuk says that it shall always be on the shulchan, which implies as long as it's on the shulchan, you're good to go. So the Gemara says, you're right. That's a knockout shaila. I can't do anything with that pasuk. Rather, Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar, Rav Dimi explains, if when you're traveling, the bread is on the shulchan, kuli alma le pligi, everyone agrees it's kosher. Everyone agrees that when you're traveling, which by the way would explain, because every single time you traveled it became disqualified. So what am I supposed to do?
They take that first, they dismantle around it, and then that's when it's here.
Well, they dismantled around it, leaving,
You're actually taking it out.
No, yeah, but there is no halachic machane shchina as they're traveling. As we'll see, by the way, it's actually very relevant because when they were moving, although they were moving the parts of the heichal, and as we're going to see, they were moving it in the formation, meaning it's not like the machane shchina was always called the Mishkan. The Mishkan was always in the center of Klal Yisrael. It wasn't in the back. When they traveled, they had to keep it in the center, but the halachic machane shchina no longer existed, meaning someone who was tamei meis, who's not allowed in that area, is walking past the area that it was, meaning there was no halachic machane shchina anymore. So we'll see. So it's a tricky. So says the Gemara, if the bread is on the shulchan when they're traveling, everyone agrees it's fine. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is b'mesulik. The machlokes is the following case: they take the bread off to eat, and then as they're about to eat, Hashem says, "Start moving." So now they're moving, but it's no longer on the actual shulchan. It's maybe right next to the shulchan, meaning it's still in the area of the with the other kalim, but it's not technically on the shulchan. Why is it on the shulchan? Because they just took it off to eat. Now, by the way, Mefarshim are bothered by this. He took it off to eat on Shabbos. They did not travel. It's unlikely that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would begin a travel on Shabbos. So the Mefarshim try to deal with the practicality. As we're going to see, it's not the most practical application. But the Gemara says, yeah. On Shabbos, they would take the lechem hapanim off, they would burn the frankincense, the kahanim would eat the lechem hapanim. The cases where the kahanim take it off, they're about to eat, and then Hashem's like, and look, we got to move. So now they're moving, that's the machlokes. And what's the machlokes? The Gemara says, Man damer nifsal. The one who says that it's posol d'chsiv, kasha yachanu keniso. We're going to do the same thing, but now it's not on the shulchan. Kasha yachanu keniso, what does that mean? Ma b'chani yasai nifsal b'yaitse. Just like when they were encampment, if the bread is outside of the heichal, it's outside of the azara, whatever, outside of the Beis Hamikdash area, it's pasul. So too, it's also going to be pasul. And by the way, and it's not on the shulchan to protect it. Okay. The one who says that it's kosher, how does he explain it? He says, oil moyed. Because here's the point. It's not on the shulchan anymore. So why is it kosher? So what's the answer? The one who says that it's kosher says, yeah, but where are you traveling? You're traveling with the Mishkan. Meaning, it's not like they took the bread and they just shipped it outside, it's still in the area, right next to the menorah, right next to the paroiches, right? And they're just moving. So he says, the pasuk says, "V'nosa oil moed." It was a traveling Mishkan, which by the way is the opposite. Mishkan means to rest. Traveling Mishkan. So what does it mean? The answer is Aval Bisha Nasa Oil Moed. Even though it's traveling, it's still an Oil Moed. So the pasuk is telling us that that area still has the kedusha. So as long as the bread is kept within that area, it's going to be fine. Now, V'idach Nami, the one who says that it's kosher haksiv kasha yachanu keniso, what does he do with that pasuk? So the answer is, as we said before, Lidach Gisa. He says this pasuk actually backs me up. Just like when it's in the encampment, as long as it's still inside the Mishkan, you're fine. So too when it's traveling, as long as it's in the area of the Mishkan, you're fine as well. The one who says that it's possible, it says v'nasa oil moed, which implies that when it's traveling, it still has the kedusha of the oil moed. The answer is no. The Nasa oil moed does not mean that when you're traveling, the bread is going to be okay. No. Really, when you travel, it becomes disqualified. It says V'nasa oil moed. Doesn't that mean that it still has the Mishkan? No. It's the regolim. L'degolim huda'asa. It's just telling you where should the Mishkan move when it's traveling. Meaning, when you're traveling, the same way the Mishkan was in the center of Klal Yisrael when it was in the encampment, so to when you travel, the Mishkan has to be there. It's not like you could have where everyone just goes on their own, and the Mishkan could be in the back or in the. No. It has to. You have to sort of move as you were, so to speak. Okay. The idach and the other opinion who already uses this pasuk. How does he know that the Mishkan was in the center? He darshans it from that pasuk. Okay, good. So you have over here the machloikas. Everyone agrees if the bread is on the shulchan, you're fine. The machloikas is if the bread is taken off the shulchan. Says the Gemara Meis, we have a kasha. Look at this brisa. The brisa, and these are Amoraim fighting. So this is a brisa. The brisa says, "B'shas siluk masois." When they're traveling and they're dismantling the Mishkan and they're traveling, kodshim nifsalim b'yoytze. All the karbanos become invalid. Stop. It's a bomb. It's not machlekes anymore. You're having a shaila of whether the bread is disqualified or not. It says kodshim nifsalim b'yoytze. They all become disqualified because they're no longer in that original spot. Boom. And by the way, then the brisa says, "V'zavenu mitzrayim mishtalchen chutz l'mechitzasan." Another halacha is that the mitzora and the zav are not allowed to enter the encampments. Meaning, you have three encampments. You have the Machane Shechina, surrounded by Machane Levia, and the Machane Yisrael. As I told you, when the Machane Shechina is dismantled, those that are Tamei Meis can now enter the Machane Shechina, because there is no Machane Shechina anymore. So it's sort of, Tamei Meis is sort of waived. The shaila is, does that mean a Mitzora can go join his family? Because technically, there's no more Machane Shechina anymore. Does that mean that there's a breakdown of all the Machanes? No. Only Tamei Meis, which is relevant to Machane Shechina, is dismantled, but the Zav and Mitzora, they still have to stay, meaning the Mitzora cannot enter Machane Yisrael, and the Zav cannot enter Machane Levia. Those still halachas, those still encampments, those rules still apply. Okay. So says the Gemara, the kasha is, how could you tell me that the bread, when they're traveling, according to one Amoira, is kosher? The Brisa says, kodshim nifsalim b'yoytze. It's clear as day. So the Gemara says, bar melechem haponim. When it says the kodshim become disqualified, it means except for the bread. All kodshim become disqualified except for the bread. That's a pella. It's an obvious question. Why except for the bread? I don't understand. Manavshach. If we look at the traveling Mishkan as if it didn't move, then all kodshim should be okay. If we look at it as it's completely dismantled and it doesn't exist anymore, then all kodshim should be disqualified, including the bread. Why is bread different? But basically, it says the Gemara Manavshach. I oil moed dafkahu. If you actually believe that it's a real oil moed as you're traveling, that it's mamish has the same status of the oil moed, it's as if it didn't move. Afilu kodshim nami. Then all kodshim should be okay. And oil moed lav dafkahu. And if you look at there is a breakdown of it, then afilu lechem ponim nami. In other words, I don't see the distinction. So you know what the Gemara answers? There is no machlokes. This entire Amid, you could sort of forget. There's no machlokes. We thought there was a machlokes. We're trying to figure out what is the machlekes. So first we thought the machlekes was the bread is on the shulchan. We said that doesn't make sense. Then we said, okay, no, they're arguing when the bread is dismantled. The problem is when the bread is not on the shulchan, everyone should agree that it's an issue because the Brisa says it's an issue. You know what the answer is? There is no machlekes. Each Amar was talking about a different situation. When the Amar said it's kosher, he was referring to when the bread was on the shulchan as they're traveling. When the other Amar said it's pasul, it's where the bread is off the shulchan. There's no machlekes. So when the Brisa says it's kosher, it's talking about when the bread is on the shulchan. When the Brisa said it's pasul, it's where its bread is off the shulchan. There is no machlokes at all. They just were not talking about the same case. Says the Gemara, Elkiyasa Rav and Omar, Mar Omar b'Mesuder, Mar Omar b'Mesuluk v'loy pligi. There is no machlokes. They're just talking about different situations. So when the Brisa says that it's pasul, it is universal. It's not a machlokes. That's talking about where the bread is off the shulchan. When the bread is on the shulchan, it's fine.
Where did the Kohanim eat it? In their homes or only in the
No, it's Kaddish Kashrim in the Mishkan. Says the Gemara, Rabbi, one quick point, and then we'll have a Abaye says like this. Our whole discussion is the bread pasul because of the traveling? Abaye, for some reason, has a presumption that the two options of when they would travel was first thing at night or first thing in the morning. Those are the only choices. They never started traveling at 11 o'clock in the morning. They never got like a late start, to the zoo. It was either first thing Seisa Kochavim or Alos Achama. Those are the two options. So says Abaya, you see from here that traveling at Seisa Kochavim is an option. Why? Because if the only option is Alos Achama, dawn, if that's the only option. Again, Abaya believes there is no option during the day other than dawn. The only other presumable option to start the travel would be at Seis. So it's either dawn or Seis. Those are the times. So Abaya says, I'll prove it to you that Seis was an option. Why? If dawn was the only option, then the karbanos are not going to be pasul because of the dismantling. They're going to be pasul because of lina. Right? Karbanos become disqualified the following morning. So this Brisa said, when they dismantle the Mishkan, it's going to be a problem because they've now left, there is no Mishkan anymore, so they've now outside of the Mishkan. Forget about it. There's a separate issue. All the karbanos become disqualified because it's dawn. They become disqualified at dawn. So the only reason why the Brisa is saying that there's a disqualification because of Yotzei is because there was another time they could travel. They could travel at Seisa Kochavim. So technically it's not dawn yet. But now it's an issue because the Machne Shechina was dismantled. Meaning for whatever reason, Abaya felt that those were the two options, and Abaya is medayik from this brisa that you're able to start traveling at Seisa Kochavim. Because if the only time to travel was dawn, then the disqualification would not be because of the dismantling in the Mishkan. The disqualification would be because of lina. If I have a carbon that I didn't necessarily burn on the Mizbeach yet, it's disqualified anyway. The brisa says it's disqualified because there is no Mishkan anymore because it's dismantled. It's disqualified anyway because it's dawn.
when would you bring the coming?
Huh? What do you mean?
Traveling that anyway. The assumption is they were only traveling.
The assumption is that the only time they could begin traveling, is dawn. And he's saying, no, they were able to begin traveling at Seis. And he's medayik from this brisa like that. So says the Gemara, Amar Abaya, Shmami, no, you see from this brisa, Yesh Silik Masas Balayla, that you're able to begin the travel at Seis Kochavim. Why? Ain't Silik Masas Balayla. And if let's say that's off the table. So Emas Madli, when would they begin travel? Mitzafra, at dawn. My area, Mishum Yotzei, then the Brisa shouldn't say that the karbanos are pasul because of Yotzei. Typically, Ifzalei Belina, they're already pasul because it's dawn. If I have a carbon that I did not yet burn on the Mizbeach, dawn already invalidates it. And if the only time to travel is dawn, then they're pasul anyway. It must be there was another time to begin travel, and that's Teis HaKochavim. So it's not a problem of Lina, but it's a problem that the karbanos, the Mishkan, is dismantled, and now it's a problem of Yotzei. I guess when they would, I don't know if they practically, I don't know. I don't know. It's a good shayla. Now the Gemara just says, Abaya, you're saying very good, right? Abaya's whole point is that you see from this brisa, they would begin traveling at night. The problem is, it's pashut. The pasuk says, "Leleches yomam v'layla ksiv." Yeah, Abaya, it's a good word. You're saying a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Leleches yomam v'layla." So Abaya responds, "No. That doesn't mean that they started traveling at night. That just means they did travel at night. I'm telling you, they could start traveling at night." Okay, it's a big chiddush. But Mao does say, "Mahani milehichet akar b'yamama, avahichet le'akar b'yamama, b'layla le'matzi akri kamash malan." That pasuk just says that you could travel at night. It doesn't mean you start traveling at night. You see from this brisa, you could start traveling at night. Okay.
The whole thing is difficult because they travel with the anane cover.
Okay.
So why wouldn't you?
No, but it doesn't. No, I also don't know why the options of traveling is only tseis or alos. Like there's for some, and the Mefarshim are bothered by like, why couldn't they, like you said, travel at 11 o'clock? So they've already brought the Tamid Shel Shachar. Great time to travel. No. Hashem is. Was that my grandmother used to say? Ich bin a Mensch auf den Platz. Right? A man, you got it on time. Yaka. So, yeah. But the lechem aponim, the only difference is the lechem aponim is a special pasuk that is lechem olav yiyah. That as long as lechem aponim on the shulchan, that's a heter. There is no such other pasuk. We don't say, well, if the meat is on the mizbeach. It doesn't work like that. I don't know. Just to finish up this topic, we had a brisa before that said that as they were traveling, a mitzaira, this parsha, I always like where it comes together. This parsha, a mitzaira is not allowed to enter the camp. Meaning, don't think that because the Mishkan is dismantled, all the rules are broken. No, a mitzaira still has to stay out of the other machanas. Or mini, I have a brisa that has a contradiction. The other brisa says, Huglu haparoiches, when the curtains were rolled up, i.e. when they were traveling, Hutru hazavin v'mitzarim l'kanis l'sham. A zav and a mitzaira could enter there. A zav and mitzaira is able to walk through the area that held the Mishkan. Meaning, when they're traveling, the zav and mitzaira don't have to avoid the area that was the Mishkan. So you see that a zav and mitzaira, there's a breakdown. We said before that a zav and mitzaira is not allowed to enter. Over here, the zav and mitzaira is allowed to enter. So that's a kasha. Now, one second. Yep. So says the Gemara. So you see over here, this brisa implies that the rules of Zav Mitzara are suspended. The other brisa implies that they're not suspended. So how do you reconcile this? So says the Gemara, Amr Ravashi loy kasha ha Rav Eliezer ha Rabbanon. It's a machlekes the Tanoim. The Tanya, as the brisa go to the next page. Rav Eliezer Omer Yachol dachu Zavin u'Mitzarin. V'nichnusu la'azara b'Pesach haba b'Tuma Yachol yuchayavin Taimar loymar v'yishlechu min ha'machane kol tzurua v'chol zav v'chol tamid l'nefesh b'shah she'tamei meisim mishtalchin zav mitzayir mishtalchin ein tamei meisim mishtalchin ein zav mitzayir mishtalchin. This means like this. The halacha is that when a carbon Pesach, let's say all of Klal Yisrael are tamei meis, they would bring a carbon Pesach while tamei. Now, what if all of Klal Yisrael are mitzayirim? Every single member of Klal Yisrael has saras. Did they bring a carbon Pesach in a state of tumah? No. Carbon Pesach was only brought Pesach Rishon in a state of tumah when it was tamei meis. If everyone was a mitzayra is irrelevant. It doesn't help. Let's say they have a situation where all of Klal Yisrael are tamei meis. So they're bringing a Pesach Rishon in a state of tumah. I'm a mitzayra. I hear tumah's allowed now. Tumah's back to being cool now. I'm in. And I walk and I go to the Beis HaMikdash. The halacha is Yachol yu chayavin. You might think that you're chayav kares. Kamash malon. No. Why? Says Rav Eliezer, because it says v'yishlechu min hamachane kol zroa v'chol zav v'chol tamei l'nefesh. It says that no one can enter the Beis HaMikdash, neither tamei meis, neither a zav, or neither a mitzayra. The implication is the issue of a zav and mitzayra entering only applies when all three are not allowed to enter. But if tamei meis is suspended, then a zav and mitzara are also suspended. What do you see from Rabbi Eliezer? You see from Rabbi Eliezer that he holds that if tumei meis is suspended, then a zav and mitzara also, they're sort of all together. The whole thing falls apart. So we had two brises before. One brisa said that as they're traveling, someone who's tumei meis is allowed to walk where the Mishkan was, because Machne Shechina is dismantled. The question is, what about a zav and mitzara? Can they also go to those areas? Do their rules also suspend? One brisa says yes, one brisa says no. The answer is, it's do you believe in Rav Eliezer or not? Rav Eliezer holds that when tamei meis is suspended, when one machane falls apart, they all fall apart. So therefore, tamei meis, let's say a Pesach ba b'tumah, which means tamei meis is suspended. If a mitzara goes, he's also not going to be chayiv. Once one falls, they all fall. The Rabbanan look at it's completely separate. No, tamei meis is allowed. You're a mitzayra, you'll be chayiv kares. Just because one falls apart doesn't mean the other two fall apart. So this shaila of whether the zav and mitzayra are allowed to enter the area called where the Machne Yisrael, Machne Shechina, whatever, that would be totally in this machlekes. Okay, good. New Mishnah. Mishnah says like this. Ach ashtei alechem V'achas lechem aponim, whether it's the dough for the shei lechem, whether it's the dough for the lechem aponim, lishasan v'arichasan b'chutz. You could make the dough outside of the azara, meaning the dough did not have to be made in the azara itself, but afiyasan b'fnim, but it had to be baked inside of the azara. Okay. Ve'ena deiches es Shabbos, but the baking does not override Shabbos. Meaning, although the lechem aponim was placed on the shulchan on Shabbos, it was baked on Friday. It was baked erev Shabbos. Okay. Because why should it be deiches Shabbos? If you could bake it before Shabbos, why should it be deiches Shabbos? That's a general rule that if you could avoid being Mechal Shabbos, we do so. That's the first opinion. Rav Yehuda says, Kol Maseim B'fnim. I disagree. The Tanna Kama believes the kneading of the dough, the making of the dough can be done out of the azara, but the baking in the azara. Rav Yehuda says, no, everything has to be done in the azara, both the baking and the kneading of the dough. By the way, why does Rav Yehuda hold this way? As we'll see in the Gemara, because Rav Yehuda, we had this shaila, I think last Shabbos, where the kalim that were used for dry measures holy with the Shemen HaMishcha. If they were, then making the dough, which involves those measures, must be done in the azara because they're kadosh. If you believe the Tanna Kama, who's the Tanna Kama? No name. The Tanna Kama believes that the dry measures were not kadosh. That's Rav Akiva Shita. They were not kadosh. So because they're not kadosh, they could be done outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Rav Shimon says, Lo'ilam havara galoimer. Rav Shimon says, I was always accustomed to say, Shtei halechem v'lechem aponim ksheris ba'azara ksheris b'espagi. He has a completely separate shita. He says it doesn't even have to be baked in the azara. It can be baked outside of Yerushalayim. No problem. It doesn't. There's no kedusha to the dry kalim. It doesn't even have to be baked inside the Beis Hamikdash. So you have a three-way machlokes. According to our view, that everything inside. According to Shimon, everything could be done outside, and then Tanna Kama needed outside, baked inside. Okay. Says the Gemara Hagufa Kasha. I have a kasha. Omrit lishasan v'arichasan b'chutz. The Tanna Kama believes that it could be made into dough outside of the azara. Why? Alma midas yavish le'niskacha. He obviously believes that the kalim for measuring out flour were not kadosh. Because if they're kadosh, then it has to be done in the azara. Obviously, it's kadosh. Not kadosh. It could be done. You could take those kalim, go outside of the Beis Hamikdash, go to the old city, and do it there. But then what did you say? It has to be baked inside. V'afiyasim b'fnim. Alma midis yavish neskacha. The Gemara has a very interesting question, and that is, we had a shaila this past Shabbos. Were the items used for dry measures ever anointed with the anointing oils? Were they anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha? Rav Akiva says no, and I think Rav Yossi said yes. Here's the shaila. This Tana, what does he believe? He's a bit of a contradiction. Why? You're able to make the dough outside of the azara, which means that the measuring for the flour is not kadosh, but it has to be baked inside, which means the ovens are kadosh. Wait a minute. Aren't the ovens, don't the ovens have the same status as an item, as the kli used to measure the dry items? Meaning the measuring cup for flour is a kli that's used for the bread. The oven is also used for the bread. So the Gemara feels there's a bit of a contradiction. Were these items anointed or not? For some reason, the Gemara assumes that the oven is the same as a measuring cup. If the measuring cup is not anointed, mistama the oven was also not anointed. If the measuring cup was anointed, mistama the oven was. So over here is a contradiction. You can make the dough outside. Should we close the door? Do you mind just closing maybe that door in the middle? Was the measuring cup anointed? Were the kalim anointed that were used for the dough or not? The Tanna Kama says the dough can be made out of the azara, which means the kalim was not anointed, but it had to be baked in the azara. It's a little better. But it means that it had to be baked in the azara, which implies that it was anointed. For some reason, the Gemara assumes that the oven has the same status as a measuring cup. So was it anointed or not? So you said the dough could be made outside, which means the measuring cup was not anointed, but it has to be baked inside because the oven is mekadesh. That means the oven were they anointed or not? So there's an obvious answer, which is oven was anointed, measuring cup's not anointed. So the Gemara gets it. The Gemara says, Amar Rabba comments, Huksha Adam Kashashu Kasha Kabarzel. This hard question came from a very, very sharp individual. Umanu Rav Sheshus. It's a good shaila. So the Gemara says, my kasha, why is such a good shaila? Dilma Isaron lo Mekadesh, Taner Mekadesh. Why can't you say that they anointed the oven, but they didn't anoint the measuring cups? So you anoint the oven. So the oven, when it bakes something, is mekadesh it, so it has to be baked inside the azara. But the measuring cups are not anointed, so they could be made. The dough could be made outside of the old city, in the old city. Why is there such a kasha? So that's fair. Rather, eli kasha al kasha. This was the kasha. Afiyason b'fneim al motanu mekadesh ve'enu deiches Shabbos if sabelina. This is a good shayla. Shayla is like this. Every carbon has to be taken care of that day. The next day, it's already disqualified. Now, the average carbon, that means burning on the azar, burning on the mizbeach, anointing with the sprinkling the blood. The lechem aponim were interesting. Once they're on the shulchan, they can last a week. But if they're kadosh, they have to be placed on the shulchan that day. Here's the point. The brisa contradicts itself. It has to be baked inside the azara, which means that the oven is mekadesh it, but then what's the next halacha? It's not doicha Shabbos. So when is it baked? The day before. And then you put it on the next day, you put it on the mizbeah, on the shulchan. So that's a contradiction. If you're telling me that when they're baked, they're already kadosh, I have to put them that day on. So you say, no, the oven is mekadesh it, therefore it has to be baked inside the azara. So they're holy right now, but it's not doicha Shabbos. So when are you baking it? Friday. And when am I putting it on the shulchan? The next day. It's already disqualified. If you tell me the oven is not mekadesh it, it's not kadosh yet. What makes it kadosh is the shulchan. Fine. So you could bake it on Thursday. I don't care. Bake it whenever you want. Put it on the shulchan on Shabbos. But if you're telling me that the oven is mekadesh it, and that's why it has to be baked inside the azara, which means that the oven is mekadesh it, so now it's kadosh, but it's not doicha Shabbos. That doesn't make sense. If it's kadosh, it has to be doicha Shabbos because there's no other time to bake it. It has to be baked on Shabbos and placed on the shulchan that day. You see? Correct. The oven is mekadesh it, but once it's kadosh, it has to be placed on the shulchan. It needs to do its avoida. Okay. No. The kli sharis is mekadesh. Over here, the oven has the status of a kli sharis. That's the point. If you're telling me that it has to be baked inside the azara, that means the oven has the status of a kli sharis, which it means it imbues kedusha into the bread. If that's the case, then it has to be baked on Shabbos. Because if it's baked on Friday, it'll already be disqualified. That's the contradiction. So says the Gemara, to that he says, Amar Rava, Huksha Adam, Kasha Shugad Shabarzel, Umar Rav Sheshes. That's what he said. Oh, it's a good shaila from a very sharp individual, which is Rav Sheshes. Amar Rav Ashi, my kushya. Rav Ashi says, maybe, I think you misunderstood. How do you know that the oven is mekadesh? Where does it say in the Mishnah the oven is mekadesh? Well, it doesn't actually. It says it has to be baked bifnim. Bifnim means in the azara. Why? Because the oven is kadosh. Who says bifnim means in the azara? Maybe bifnim just means it has to be done diligently. Maybe bifnim means it could be baked in Yerushalayim, but it just has to be, you make sure that it's not tameh. Bifnim means diligent. Says the Gemara, Amar of Ashi, my akusha, dilma my bifnim, b'mokum's reason. It doesn't mean it has to be baked in the azara. It just has to be baked by the kehanim in a diligent way. So the Gemara says, Haravashi bedusahi. Ravashi is making an error. That's not the word bifnim. Bifnim means inside. The Gemara says also, by the way, can I ask you a question? Wouldn't then everything have to be done bifnim? Right? Baked bifnim. But the dough can be made not bifnim. If bifnim means diligently by kehanim, I'm pretty sure they should be making the dough as well, and it shouldn't just be getting it from a rando. Says the Gemara, Manavshach, Iafia beinan's reason, Lisha v'achanami beinan's reason. If bifnim just means diligently, then don't say it's baked bifnim, but the dough doesn't have to be kneaded bifnim. Everything should have to be done bifnim. What are you talking about? And Elisha Rachalei beinan's reason, I feel nami loy beinan's reason. Elder Rashi Badusi. Here Rashi is a mistake. Now, the Gemara just has like this. We have a machlokes of whether the bread has to be baked. In the Mishnah, the machlokes of whether the bread has to be baked in the azara. The Tanakama says yes. Rav Shimon said everything can be baked outside. And it has to do with whether the tanur is mekadesh. If the tanur is mekadesh, it has to be done in the azara. If the tanur is not mekadesh, it can be baked outside. As machlokes in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Amrav, what is the, let me just say outside, then we'll see it inside. What is the machlokes about? So the Gemara's conclusion is going to be, it's halacha Moshe Sinai. One opinion had halacha Moshe Sinai that it had to be baked inside because the tanur is mekadesh, and one opinion did not. But the Gemara now wants to say it's a machlokes based on the following psukim. Now, as a background to this pasuk, David HaMelech is running from Shaul. He goes to Ir Nov Ir HaKohanim. He goes to Nov where the Kohanim were. He's starving. And he says the following line. It's all based on the following pasuk. David HaMelech said, I'd like to eat the bread. And regarding the lechem aponim, he says, Hu derech chol, this bread is chol, ve'afki hayom yekadesh bekli. Even though today it will be kadosh in a vessel. That pasuk is very hard to translate as to what David HaMelech is saying. The Gemara says it's a machlokas, what David HaMelech meant. Rav Yehuda savar, b'chol ashkechinu deka'afale. Both Rav Yehuda and Rav Shimon believe that David HaMelech entered Nov, Ir Kohanim, and he finds them baking the bread. The shaila is, what did he say to them? So Rav Yehuda says he finds them baking bread on a weekday, on a Friday. And he says to him, Amar lahu, derech cholka afisule, you're baking it on a weekday, afki ayoim yekadesh bekli. But it's being baked in the oven, which is kadosh. If silvalina, it's already going to be disqualified. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda was saying, David HaMelech comes and he sees them baking on a Friday, and he says, it's chol, you're baking it on a chol, weekday, a Friday, kadosh. It's in an oven that's kadosh. It's going to become disqualified. What do you see? The tanur is mekadesh it. And it has to be baked. Hence, by the Beis HaMikdash, it has to be baked in the Azar. That's Rabbi Yehuda's statement. Rav Shimon says no. Rav Shimon says the opposite. He showed up, and it was Shabbos when they were baking it, not Friday. And he says to them, Amar lahu, Lo derech chol b'Yisrael mevad. Shouldn't you bake it on a Friday? Meaning, why are you being mechalel Shabbos? The tanur is not mekadesh, so it could be baked on a Friday. Meaning, in both cases, David HaMelech shows up, sees them baking, and is not happy with what they're doing. The first opinion said that they were baking it on a Friday. David HaMelech said, why are you baking on chol? It's kaddish. The tanur is mekadesh it. It's going to be disqualified. So you see the tanur is mekadesh it. According to Shimon, no. He actually found them baking it on a Shabbos. But he said, isn't the oven chol? The oven is not kadosh. It should be baked on a Friday. You don't need to do it on Shabbos. You would only need to do it on Shabbos if the tanur is mekadesh it. Therefore, if you bake it on a Friday, it'll be disqualified. So no, it's Mechal Shabbos, it's Deicha Shabbos, you have no choice. But he said it's Chol. Why are you baking it on Shabbos? Why are you Mechal Shabbos? For no reason. So you see the tanur is not Kadosh. Oh, and what is Mekadesh it? The Shulchan, but not the actual oven. So that's the Machlokes. Now this Machlokes of Yehuda and Rav Shimon, based on the Psukim, is making the presumption that David HaMelech showed up while they were baking the bread. And the time is, what did David HaMelech say to the Kohanim? The problem is that's not true. The Gemara will end with this. The Gemara says, "Mi matzis amar de b'shas afiyesh kechinu." How could you say that David HaMelech found them while they were baking the bread? It's not true. V'aksiv, the pasuk says, "V'yitin lehakoyin kodesh ki lo yihaya sham lechem ki im lechem aponim hamusarim l'fnei Hashem." The pasuk says that when David HaMelech showed up, they were placing the bread on the shulchan. It was already baked. So he didn't show up when they were baking the bread. It was already baked when he showed up. So says the Gemara, really the truth is like this. David HaMelech did not show up when they were baking. He did not have a taina on how, he did not critique how they were baking, and therefore we have no way to learn from that discussion to our discussion of whether the tanur is mekadesh, because he showed up, it was already baked. Agav, before we finish, so what was David HaMelech's taina then? If it's already baked, he's showing up, it's already baked, so what is David HaMelech saying? So the Gemara says, I'll say it outside, we'll say it inside, David HaMelech was saying it was already baked, and he was asking for the bread to eat. So they wanted to. So David HaMelech was saying, there's two breads on Shabbos. There's the breads they took off, and there's the breads they just put on. David HaMelech was saying, not only can I eat the bread that you took off, which is now chol in that it's now edible to kehanim. He said, David HaMelech is saying, not only am I allowed to eat the bread that you took off, which is eligible to the kehanim, I'm even allowed to eat the bread you just put on. Why? It's mamish kaddish kadashim, because David HaMelech was so hungry, it was pikuach nefesh. That was his point. Not only am I allowed to eat what's chol because it's pikuach nefesh, I could even eat what you put on, which is kodesh. That's what David HaMelech is saying. It has nothing to do with our discussion about baking. The Gemara says, "Elamai derech chol dekamerlu, hachi kamerlu." Leka lechem ki im lechem aponim esar melefnei Hashem. He said, "Give me bread," and they said, "All we have is the lechem aponim. You can't eat it." Amar lahu, he said to them, "Loi mi boyhai." Not only could I eat the bread that was taken off, the kivin derafu mila derechol, because once it's taken off, the isurim are much less because it's eligible for kehanim. So it's at least not an issa daraisa. It's not me'il anymore for me. But rather, ela afilu heich nami. Even the bread which is now currently on the shulchan, da'ayom yikdash bakli, which is mamish kodesh kadashim, havle leichel, I could eat. Why? Because mesukanhu. Because David HaMelech was in pikuach nefesh. David HaMelech had what's called bulmus. Bulmus was a type of disease that if you got so hungry, if you weren't fed that food right now, you would die. So David HaMelech was saying, it's pikuach nefesh. Now, by the way, according to this, it was not baked. So our discussion before of Rav Shimon, Rav Yehuda, whether the Tanur is Mekadesh, cannot be gleaned from this discussion. So says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda, Rav Shimon, so what's the machlokas about now? If it's not based on Sukkim, what is it? It's Gemara Pligi. It was just tradition. One opinion had halacha Moshe Messinai that the Tanur was Mekadesh. One opinion had the Tanur was not Mekadesh. Good. The Gemara says Dekanami, and when with this, I'll prove it to you that it's not based on Sukkim, it's rather based on tradition. Because if you remember in the Mishnah, what did Rav Shimon say? Rav Shimon says, La'olam hava roga loimer. I'm always accustomed to saying that terminology is not based on drashas. When someone makes a drasha, they don't say La'olam hava roga loimer. La'olam hava roga loimer means I've always had this tradition from my Rabbeim. So you see, it's not based on Sukkim, it's based on Alchamash Messina. The Gemara says, Shnei Alechem, Ksheres Bezars, Ksheres Bepipagi, Shmami. No, the fact that he used that terminology means it's not based on Sukkim, it's based on Halacha L'Moshe Messina. I'm stopping.